Hi, everyone. So here we are, week 6, talking about counseling Jewish Americans. And before I start with my lecture, I just wanted to make a couple of notes because, as hopefully y'all have seen, I have caught up on grading. And one thing that I just wanted to mention two things. The first is just like big kudos on your client-facing lines in your reflections. I thought that they were so good, and I'm going to steal some of them. The other is like kind of technical, but just wanting to put it in your vernacular that when somebody identifies as cisgender, it's not cisgendered. So just like I am a cisgender woman. Also, just keeping in mind too, in terms of gender, we of course try to stay away from like girl and boy, talking about adult humans. But we also try to stay away from female and male. Um, and talk about like women and men instead. So I'm talking in the binary here, but just a couple of notes, some language I noticed. So I wanted to bring that to y'all's attention. So the chapter that we read this week was on the Semitism schism revisited, the Jewish Palestinian legacies in MFT training. So ultimately, this was a chapter written by two women. So Linda Stone Fish, who is a Jewish professor, and Donna Dalal Fern, who is a Palestinian student in the MFT program. They intersected through a difficult dialogue, and ultimately, what they did was, tried to use this dialogue to sharpen their ability to facilitate and participate in high stakes conversations in training and practice. And my hope is that you can also apply this to you. So here, my hope is that, as you're reading this chapter and just like leaning into the material in this class in general, that you're taking a learning stance where it's one of curiosity, humility, accountability. And then in this reading in particular, our goal is not to decide who is right, but to practice holding complex truths, attending to hierarchy and harm, and translating insight into clinical training moves that foster equity and repair. So some anchor lenses here is privilege and oppression are produced in everyday interactions. So what we do and what we don't do. Semite is historically refers to both Jewish and Arabic people. In common US usage, anti-Semitism centers around anti-Jewish bias, which can render Palestinians invisible. So training settings embed hierarchy. So in terms of title, role, gatekeeping power, evaluation, and then horizontal violence names harm among marginalized groups within oppressive contexts. And in this chapter, there was a lens that was applied through internal family systems. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, one of the biggest components of that is the use of capital S self. So it is this, theorized to be this, I imagine it like in our chest of this like unharmed, pristine essence of who we are. So so through IFS, it helps us to attend to our capital S self that is curious and compassionate, and also those protective parts, the firefighters and the managers that can be activated in conflict. So, sorry, Linda and Donna, right? So Linda situates herself as Jewish with white and class privilege. She was raised amidst the Holocaust memory and the Zionist commitment. Artifacts like the 1947 Weizmann letter embody intergenerational purpose, quote, the cause of Israel, and experiences of anti-Jewish jokes, stereotypes, and outright hatred transformed her identification from by birth to by choice. Critically, she recognizes dual locations. She benefits from race and class privilege while also feeling targeted as a Jewish woman, fostering chronic vigilance. So Donna narrates a bicultural upbringing. She was raised in the US suburbs and the Middle East. She experienced deep extended family kinship distinct from her maternal side. Her father left Palestine in 1949. The family really rarely centered the Palestinian tragedy in earlier conversations. She internalized an invisibility rule around her Palestinian identity, so safety and adaptation, and felt under-resourced in college when facing polished Zionist arguments. So as a result, she did create a distance from her own story, and she's longing to find her voice. Also, just as a reminder here, WASP is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So the chapter spotlights how terms like anti-Semitism can narrow public imagination to Jewish experience, further obscuring Palestinian Semitic identity. Naming practices matter in curricula, policy, and hallway talk. They determine whose suffering is legible and whose safety is prioritized. As trainers and as clinicians, we must surface these defaults explicitly and revise language to widen the moral circle. Their initial lunch was warm and energizing. There was mutual respect and resonance. Linda experienced equality based on competence, likability signals, which is a privileged blind spot. And Donna still occupied a one-down position structurally. This asymmetry sits silently in many, quote, good relationships in training cultures until conflict exposes it. Donna enters grad school with fresh reminders that Palestinian speech may carry costs. So her son's rejections, opposing op-eds, a minor academic incident becomes an amplifier for accumulated fear, activating protective parts. So asking yourself, is it safe to be seen here? These preconditions matter. Conflict rarely begins at the moment it appears. As a retreat, Linda's intergenerational protectiveness surged. So saying or thinking to herself, everyone hates Jews. Her role power insulated her from feedback. The conversation closed. This is a classic training risk. When leaders' activated parts define the room, minority voices learn to stay silent. So Donna models courage, courageous practice. She asks for a structured, witnessed space before approaching a powerful faculty member. She surfaces a painful dissonance, what the program teaches versus what she experiences, and its impact on her sense of safety. This locates the issue in systems, not personalities, while still inviting personal accountability. So Linda tracks a critical pivot, acknowledging her reactive parts while choosing capital S, self-led witnessing. Her apology is specific and grounded in impact, not intent. She then undertakes story correction work by engaging Palestinian narrative directly. Here, like a key move is to model repair and commit to ongoing learning beyond the meeting. So Donna later uses IFS to name her parts: a protector guarding against exposure, a striving part wanting to contribute her story. She marks a somatic moment when Linda's system softened, signaling safety. Her professional project becomes voice building in communities where Jewish privilege may be unseen. The authors wrestle with moral voice versus other harm. So Linda asks, how do I transmit Jewish pride and vigilance without violating others' justice? Horizontal violence reframes Jewish-Palestinian conflict within broader oppression dynamics, useful for avoiding both sides' traps while still naming the harm. So what made the dialogue work? You can design elements to replicate. So create witnessed spaces, explicitly acknowledge role power, invite impact narratives, offer grounded apologies, and commit to narrative widening. So these assignments these are around assignments that center the other's literature. These are teachable, repeatable moves in training contexts. So you want to operationalize values. First is to co-construct agreements that name hierarchy and outline repair expectation. The second is to include dialogue protocols, things like preparation, facilitation roles, a debriefing portion, repair commitments. 3 is to audit grading and feedback for retaliation risks when students disclose marginalized identities. 4 is to assign paired readings, so a Zionist and a Palestinian narrative with reflective prompts that center impact and complexity. So some skills to practice here. A template for witnessing, you could say something like, hearing what you've shared, I understand that X action impacted you by Y. This makes sense to me and I'm sorry. An apology checklist that there's no if, you name the behavior plus the impact, then you outline next steps and you invite feedback. You want to assign across different memoirs, essays, and ask for charitable summaries. Practice ritual repair. So, for example, accountability letters or brief statements in class that recenter marginalized experience. And I know I'm talking specifically about like MFT training. These are absolutely things that all apply to your clinical practice, and also things that you are more than welcome to advocate for in your schooling. So here, just offering some reflection prompts for you. You can journal these if you would like. And since some of you may not know IFS language, no worries, but just offering a space for you to pause and contemplate questions like, where do I hold simultaneous privilege and marginalization? You can recall a difficult dialogue that you had, which parts were activated for you. And again, you don't have to use IFS specific language. Just think about yourself as like, there's a system inside of you. You're multifaceted. So, I think we use IFS language all the time, kind of casually, of like, a part of me wants to do this thing, another part questions. So just trying to like name what are those parts. A term I use that might invisibilize others, for example, that may sit as anti-Semitic. What are some alternatives? And what would accountability look like from my current role power? So again, accountability in your role as a therapist at the very least, because that is a power position. All right, so this chapter demonstrates that relationship can deepen across profound historical wounds when we design for safety, move from intent to impact, and expand our narratives. Accountability is active and forward-looking. IFS gives us a humane way to stay with heat and keeping harm low. So that is that first reading. Then we had a couple of articles. So the first was ethnic identity in Jewish families, finding an application for MFT practice. So ethnicity is not a background variable. It organizes belonging, continuity, rules of living, and social location. Prior literature highlights links to self-esteem and flexibility, and this study centers the family as a living site of identity construction rather than focusing only on schools or congregations. So a little bit about the study. The purpose was to move beyond prescriptions toward lived processes in families. They used qualitative interviews where they interviewed 48 families, parents and children both spoke. They focused on dynamics and practices, and then they used open, axial, and selective coding aggregates, which made 45 initial codes, and then they categorized those into 7 higher order categories. So they used snowball sampling in a compact Jewish community. The community size and regional culture influenced availability of kosher infrastructure, synagogue life, and school calendars, which in turn shapes family practices. They wanted to keep an ecological fit in mind when applying findings to different settings, and we'll talk a little bit about limitations of that. So the interviews explored both identity content, so beliefs and rituals, and process, how choices are made, how conflict is negotiated. And this dual lens of content and process is especially useful for clinical translation. So they came up with 7 emergent categories. We can treat these 7 themes as a practical map for case conceptualization. In clinical intakes, you can probe each domain to understand identity transmission and leverage points. So the first is gendered decisions, or gendered patterns surfaced repeatedly. Jewish status is traditionally known through the mother. This can translate into mothers shouldering more of the daily ethnic socialization. So clinically, what you can do is validate the labor, explore equitable co-leadership, and check where fathers or partners wish to engage more actively. So for example, in ritual leadership, in storytelling, in synagogue connections. Second was negotiating continuity. So continuity versus choice is negotiated, not declared. Families articulate red lines, like, for example, education to a milestone, while allowing flexibility in attendance or practice intensity. Intermarriage introduces plural traditions, and therapists can scaffold clarity, shared vision, and a unified front to reduce child confusion. And the third is family of origin. So family of origin narratives powerfully shape today's stance. Clients may either replicate beloved routines or swing away from painful ones. In therapy, you can map multi-generational practices, meanings, and turning points. You can also help to co-create selective continuity strategies like the keep, modify, retire. So these traditions that have existed, do you want to keep them, modify them? Do you want to retire them? All right, so survivors and minority stress. Historical trauma lives in stories, rituals, and vigilance. Some families experience strong survivor legacies. So for example, no grandparents, daily salience. Clinically, what we can do is name minority stress and intergenerational trauma. We can balance safety behaviors with developmental freedom, challenge survivor pride into life-affirming practices. So active learning and ethics for category 5, families frame disagreement as learning. This supports adolescent negotiation and parental flexibility. Therapy can harness this by using Socratic questions, structured debates, and values clarification rooted in Jewish teachings about ethics and justice. So the 6th category, traditions and ritual life. Rituals anchor time, gather kin, and transmit meaning. Engagement arises when children understand and can enact roles. An intervention here could be to co-design right-sized rituals. So for example, Friday dinner blessings, gratitude rounds that fit capacity of each family member and deepen significance. So the last category here, cultural, religion, and community. So you want to distinguish religious practices from cultural belonging. Both are valid pathways. An assessment tip is to ask about communal ties, things like youth groups, Israel trips, volunteering, as much as synagogue attendance. So some clinical implications here. As always, make the invisible visible. Ask specifically about identity practices, roles, and meaning. Shift from compliance with ritual to co-created meaningful practices. Use trauma and resilience-informed frames when vigilance, guilt, or fear surface. So some more implications here. You want to build a practice inventory, draft a living continuity charter, embed 10 to 20-minute rituals, add communal and service anchors, rehearse scripts for boundary setting with extended family. So though along with limitations with transferability, what you can do is use these themes that were generated from this study as hypotheses to test with each family that you work with. You can adaptively tailor it to denomination, community resources, and migration histories. So identity work is living and negotiated. We, as therapists, can reduce friction and increase meaning by scaffolding small, sustainable practices and naming intergenerational legacies with care. All right, our last reading of the week. So just a reminder that Judaism encompasses religion, ethnicity, and culture. Clients' lived Judaism is highly diverse. You want to approach each family with curiosity over any assumptions. So Krieger, the author of this article, emphasizes that Judaism often functions as an organizing center for identity and relationships. Because transmission of values occurs primarily in families, MFT work is a direct lever on religious and cultural continuity and adaptation. If we avoid the religion and spirituality domain, we risk pathologizing normal religious practices or missing leverage points like Sabbath routines, life cycle rituals, and community support. You want to ask specifically about personal salience, diversity within the family, and how decisions are negotiated across generations. You want to avoid assuming that Jewish signals a fixed set of beliefs or practices. Some clients anchor in halakhic observance, others in cultural heritage, things like language, foodways, holidays, or peoplehood and Israel connection. Even within denominations, practice is heterogeneous. So you want to gain clarity on which parts of Judaism matter here. How are they expressed at home? You want to look across matrilineal and patrilineal lines. What is the role of Israel, anti-Semitism, or intergroup experiences and identity? So these are all questions that you could be asking. Krieger draws on the American Jewish Identity Survey from 2001 and related sources to situate Jewish individuals in the US. Crucially, clients may define being Jewish in divergent ways within the same household. Many adults report identity intensifying after becoming parents, while adolescents often differentiate from parental practice. So you want to plan for negotiated meaning rather than uniformity. Canonical sources foreground families as duty and sacred trust. Beyond specific commandments, the ethos is relational ethics, mutual responsibility, honoring parents, protection of dignity. Life cycle rituals bind generations. They locate suffering within a meaningful narrative and mobilize community care. These are all very powerful clinical resources. So the author reviews Talmudic sources that elevate marriage as a structure for mutual care and continuity. For observant couples, and there's words in here that I'm going to do my best to pronounce. Taharat Hamashipaka. Oops, sorry. Taharat Hamashpaka shapes intimacy rhythms, often described as enhancing desire and relational focus. In therapy, you want to normalize and integrate these rhythms when addressing intimacy, scheduling, and repair. You want to avoid pathologizing any periods of abstinence. Instead, pivot to communication and emotional connection. Parent-child relationships are moral covenants. Expect high investment in education, ethics, and lineage. The author notes norms of honoring parents can complicate disclosures about abuse or neglect. You want to validate clients' ambivalence and provide culturally attuned pathways to safety while preserving dignity and, where possible, ties. Krieger synthesizes previous work showing strong educational aspirations and discursive styles, so arguing as a learning tool, for example. Rituals are empirically linked to marital satisfaction and child adjustment. Therapeutically, you can embed or adapt rituals as homework. So, for example, you can do a tech-free Sabbath dinner, gratitude blessings to shore up bonds and regulate stress. So you can use these dimensions as assessment anchors. Who transmits what? What family of origin scripts are being replayed or resisted? Where are friction points in practice? It's kashrut, holidays, schooling. How do historical memories shape threat appraisals and resilience? What counts as authentic for each member, and how is legitimacy negotiated? So a key takeaway is even where ritual observance is selective, families prize continuity, ethics, and community. Therapy can leverage pride, purpose, and community engagement like service projects to build cohesion and hope. Krieger notes that some clients will avoid Jewish topics unless invited. You want to ask neutrally about salience and preferences. In Orthodox settings, confidentiality, matchmaking concerns, and rabbinic guidance may matter. With permission, coordinate to align goals with halakha. Self-reflect on your own reactions to Israel, anti-Semitism, LGBTQ issues, and stay centered and systems focused. You want to avoid stereotyping. Not all families are enmeshed. Still expect intense involvement that can both nourish and constrict. Use structural maps to rework hierarchy and boundaries while preserving cherished closeness. Normalize ambivalence about speaking against parents. Create language that honors dignity and truth-telling. Intermarriage is common and emotionally loaded. Focus on practical consensus building, things around holidays, life cycle rituals, educational paths, and how to explain choices to kin. Validate elders' losses while protecting the couple's autonomy. Use genograms to track legacies and loyalties. Expect a spectrum from affirming congregations to rejecting contexts. Clarify risks, supports, and client goals for belonging. Some clients will seek halakhic accommodation. Others prioritize psychological safety by relocating communally. So you want to pace your work to honor safety, privacy, and family loyalties. Family purity rhythms can be clinically advantageous. So there are built-in cycles of distance and reunion. You want to help couples plan non-physical closeness, shared study, rituals, dates during NIDA, and intentional re-engagement afterward. It's NIDA. Pretty sure it's NIDA. Always check clients' actual practices. Diversity is in the room. Use life course training, so bar and bat mitzvahs, college, marriage, births, and losses prompt reevaluation. Invite partners to surface musts learned at home and experiment with shared meaning that fits their current family. Krieger highlights fit with family systems, insights, structural, strategic, and contextual approaches. You can choose methods that match family culture, like robust dialogue, concrete tasks, ethical framing. Contextual therapy, which emphasizes things like invisible loyalties and fairness, resonates with duty and honor themes. You can design homework that weaves practice with meaning. So, for example, a weekly Sabbath check-in, blessing rituals. And then last but not least here, y'all, some practice do's and don'ts. Your stance should be curious, humble, and pragmatic. You want to calibrate language, learn key terms like Sabbath, kashrut, mikvah, and mirror clients' vocabulary. When in doubt, ask clients to teach you their practice and meanings.